Well, travelers, we're down to the last two parts of my top 50 Thomas episodes. For this list, we start getting into the darkest season of the whole show, Season 5. This is the season that I remember watching the most of as a kid, mostly because this season had just come out at the same time the movie did. Which is also where I discovered one of my favorite actors as a kid, and probably my second favorite narrator of the series, Alec Baldwin. To me, Alec Baldwin had much more range with the characters on the show, which you can see with the changes that he made to the voices of characters like Sir Topham Hatt, Gordon, and James, as those are often cited by fans as some of his best character voices. While I do prefer George Carlin's narration, as he was more funny to listen to, I will say that Alec's narration was more iconic to me because he gave the characters more variety between his voices. But with all of that being said, here are my 10 favorite episodes of Season 5. Number 20. Cranky Bugs. The first episode of the 5th season introduced another fun non-train character and set the tone for the season. A new crane called Cranky is making the engine's lives hard with his constant complaining and playing tricks on Thomas and Percy. However, karma comes back to bite him when, on a stormy night, a ship crashes into the docks and knocks Cranky over and traps several of the other engines under the roof of the shed they were sleeping in. Thus, it's up to Thomas and Percy to save Cranky so that he can help save the other engines. As I previously stated, this was the first episode of the 5th season, and it's a big departure from the previous 4 seasons in terms of the tone. While the season still keeps the humor and some of the messages that the show was known for, the quality and tone of the show was where it changed the most. While only having one specific scene in this episode, this season became much darker and had a lot more episodes where the characters were put in danger. It's something I miss from shows like this where the creators would up the ante from what previous seasons of a show had done. And this was a good start to the 5th season of Thomas the Tank Engine by taking the show into more dark and dangerous parts of the island. Number 19. Busy Going Backwards. The third episode involving Toad, and it's one that has less of a story but more fun chase scenes. Toad is feeling down because he feels unimportant and wishes he could be like the engines and travel to other places. However, the freight cars are annoyed by his complaining, so they make a plan to have his dream come true when they break away from Oliver's train. Like I said, this episode isn't one that has a great plot and only focuses on a few other characters like Oliver and some of the big engines. However, it makes up for that with a lot of great crash scenes, with the final crash being the best payoff. Definitely one of my favorite Crash episodes, and one of the better episodes involving Toad. Highly recommend it to those that love the destructive episodes of this series. Number 18. A Better View for Gordon. This one is a good comedic Gordon episode with an interesting bit of realism included in it. Gordon isn't feeling well, which he uses as an excuse to brag about how great he is, and ends up having to go to the works to be repaired. Once he arrives back, he ends up taking Sir Topham Hatt to the grand opening of his new station. Unfortunately, his brakes end up jamming, and he crashes through the back wall of the station, which leads to the station being repaired with Gordon's outline in the new wall. This is another great Crash episode that does teach kids about how bragging can and will eventually get you into trouble. The other reason I like this episode is because the crash is actually based off of a real-life crash that happened in France. In 1895, the Granville-Paris Express was late and the driver was trying to make up for lost time, which led to the train crashing through the buffers and landing outside on the Place de Rennes. It's kinda cool to learn about if you were a huge train fan like I was as a kid, though I didn't discover it until much later in my life, but it's still a cool tidbit either way. Number 17. Put Upon Percy. A great Percy episode with amazing set destruction and shows the best parts of Percy's character. Percy feels that he's being overworked, or put upon, and constantly grumbles about it to the others. After several days, he ends up helping some miners get some freight cars unstuck by pushing them down their mine. However, Percy hits them too hard and it causes an avalanche where he rushes to a nearby tarp that protects him and his crew from being buried alive. This episode is one that I find is a good example of when Percy was a well-written character. A lot of later seasons wrote him as the dumbest character who would constantly ask questions like what a certain word is, or him not getting a joke, and it really frustrated me that they changed him into such a moron. But with this episode, we got not only a great crash and avalanche scene, but also showed that Percy wasn't a moron that was easily picked on, when he remembers about the tarp and saves him and his crew from being buried alive from the avalanche. It's an episode I come back to, and is also the season where Percy was the strongest written character that actually contributed to the stories outside of being the stupid joke character. Number 16. Stepney Gets Lost. Another great episode that focused on Stepney, however, it was sadly his last appearance in the show that I was aware of. Sir Topham Hatt asks Stepney to help out Mavis and Toby at the quarry, which leads to Stepney taking a late-night train of rocks to a special part of Toby's branch line before heading home. Unfortunately, he gets lost and ends up in the smelter's yard where two new diesels named Airy and Bert take him to the smelter shed to be melted down into scrap. But fortunately for him, Sir Topham Hatt was visiting the scrapyard that evening and saves Stepney, sending him and his crew on their way home. This is one of the many episodes that included a lot more darker night settings for the show, having lots of fog and spooky trees surrounding the line that made the sets look like it came out of a horror movie. Even the scrapyard, which before was creepy, is cranked up to an 11, making it look like how the engines would view hell. It's just one of the best examples of how creative this show could get with the sets, and this season amplified them tenfold. Number 15. Toby's Discovery. The second episode that focuses on Toby this season, and is one that feels like you're going on a great adventure to the darker and unknown parts of the island of Sodor. Sir Topham Hatt asks Toby to take him and his family to the beach for a family vacation. There, Sir Topham Hatt sees his grandchildren building a sandcastle that they tell him they've seen after discovering a map of the island. Using the map, Sir Topham Hatt takes Toby onto an abandoned line where they find the castle as well as a mine that is supposedly haunted by an engine called the Old Warrior. This is another episode with great atmosphere and has some nice world building for the show. I feel like while Season 4 did have some decent world building and amazing sets involving the narrow gauge engines and their mountain line, I found that Season 5 did this a lot better because the creators added more hidden parts of the island that included great atmospheres on top of the amazing sets. Specifically, when it came to the majority of episodes that focused on the abandoned or run-down parts of the island, as this was the season that really upped its game by including more horror elements to these lost locations. Number 14. Toby and the Flood. Speaking of Toby and atmospheric episodes, this was a real doozy of an episode that included lots of destruction and mayhem for the show, and I loved it. On Toby's branch line, a village is under threat when a nearby dam is about to break and flood the village. After going to check on the dam himself, Toby tries to warn the villagers of the dam's imminent collapse, but as he tries to cross the bridge to get back to the village, the bridge ends up getting destroyed, which carries him further down the river, where Toby and his crew end up heading straight for a waterfall. While I like Toby's discovery for creating some great world building and a creepy atmosphere, I like this episode more for the great suspenseful moments. From Toby braving his way to check the dam, to being swept away on the bridge, and with Percy and Harold being the only ones that can save him. It's a really tense episode that had me on the edge of my seat as a kid, and is one that I think of when it comes to great examples of tense moments in a TV series. Number 13. Duncan Gets Spooked. Now we're getting into the three most terrifying episodes that came out of this season, and we're starting with the one that put Duncan in his place. After Peter Sam loses his cars, leading to them falling into a ravine, Duncan starts mocking him, saying that his cars will come back to haunt him, which leads to Rusty getting annoyed and telling him a story about how an engine who died falling off the bridge and into the ravine, which his spirit still haunts the bridge that the cars fell from. Duncan doesn't believe the story, but his and Rusty's driver, fireman, and engineer plan to play a trick on him so that he'll learn a lesson about teasing others for their mistakes. The episode is very reminiscent of another episode from Season 2, which I will talk about next time, but I will say that while it isn't as creepy as that episode, it still has that spooky Halloween vibe that I think of when it comes to this season. Especially the scenes on the bridge with the full moon against it, the fog rolling up from the swampy canyon below, and the engines crossing it like they're walking across a deadly tightrope. It gave me chills every time I saw this episode as a kid, but again, not as much as the one from Season 2. Number 12. Rusty and the Boulder. Well, this is certainly a departure from what Thomas and Friends was known for at the time. Sir Topham Hatt starts a new quarry up in the mountains, but Rusty is worried about the big boulder sitting on top of the mountain, as he should be, as the boulder is alive and is angry about the mining down below and decides to do something about it. which leads to the boulder going on a rampage throughout the quarry, destroying everything in its path until it reaches the sheds, where Sir Topham Hatt looks over at the damage and simply says,
"We should have left this part of the island alone."
One of the things that makes this episode stand out is that it added a more mystical element to the show, which hadn't been done before in the series, which led to the creators using this opportunity to give us probably one of the most terrifying creatures on the island of Sodor. Seriously, as a kid, this boulder was terrifying to not only look at, but also to watch it destroy everything at the quarry, as it could be anywhere, being able to move on its own and even able to roll up hills. This thing almost felt like a serial killer that would chase down its victims and always get them when they least suspected. This episode really showed how creative the writers were in making something as simple as a boulder scary. Ugh, it's staring at me. Number 11. Haunted Henry. The best episode of Season 5 and another great Henry episode. Henry is preparing to take his midnight goods train through an abandoned branch line, but before he leaves, Edward tells him that the line is haunted and that the ghost appears when an owl hoots and the mist starts to roll in. Henry, of course, doesn't believe Edward at first, but as he goes through the line, he, his driver, and fireman soon see strange things, including a warning about an unsafe viaduct and a moving light inside the old abandoned station, which leads to Henry's driver and fireman deciding to go back and try to take the train another night. However, the same thing happens again, only this time Henry's freight cars see everything and end up forcing Henry through the gate, where they end up running into a landslide and the freight cars fall into the ravine below. As much as I love the other atmospheric episodes in this season, this is the one that stands out to me for how creepy it is compared to the other two. The foggy forest with the gnarled trees brings up all the old memories I had of watching Scooby-Doo and some of the old monster movies I was able to catch on TV as a kid. I even like the way they set up how the line is haunted with simple things like placing certain items on the trees or having the gate closed when it should be open. It really added to the overall creepy tone of the episode, and it really puts me in the Halloween mood whenever I watch it for its haunting vibes.